A taxi arrives at Hart Street, Southport. The passenger refuses to pay and then runs off. He enters a studio venue where 25 children are participating in a Taylor Swift-themed dance workshop. The man takes out a knife and starts stabbing the attendants.
Police emergency. Go ahead, caller.
From what I can see, there are a lot of officers.
That this is believed to have taken place at a venue that hosts clubs and classes for expectant mothers.
It is with great sadness today I am here to advise that 2 children have died as a result of the injuries.
The attacker is identified as a 17-year-old male who is originally from Cardiff, but on the internet a different story emerges. The name Ali Al-Shakati is shared in this tweet. And 2 minutes later, this tweet was shared by Channel 3 Now, where the post received almost 4 million impressions in a matter of hours. The next day, Southport was mourning. Hundreds of people gathered to pay their respects, and amongst them, the Prime Minister.
How many more children have died on our streets, Prime Minister? How many more children?
Just found out my friend's 9-year-old daughter was killed.
You don't want it!
Just a few blocks from the scene of the attack, a large group of people was gathering near a mosque. And as the evening progressed, they clashed with the police. A vehicle was set on fire. Bricks, bottles, and rocks were thrown at the police, and 27 officers were hospitalized. The following day, the unrest spread to London, Manchester, Hartlepool and Aldershot, and in the following week, more than 50 riots erupted across England and Northern Ireland. Even though it is now widely known that the attacker wasn't an immigrant, it carried a strong anti-immigration sentiment. But simultaneously, anti-racism protests gathered thousands of people. The number of immigrants is at a near record high, but so is the number of people that have a positive opinion about migration. This is the real reason why the Southport attack led to rioting. With hindsight. So I'm writing this script as the story is unfolding, so it's very likely by the time you watch this video, there's already information in here that is outdated. As always, you can access the full script of the video with all the sources through the link in the description. But if you see anything that's already outdated in your opinion, please write it down in the comments below. I'll share a pinned comment with the most shared suggested corrections. And now, I want to start this video a few years ago, across the channel in France.
On the edge of town, they sleep in the ditches. Every morning, they wait for the trucks to arrive. The first group manages to open the door. A little further on, the driver stops. He's clearly aware of what's just happened.
In 2022, these kind of reports aired regularly on TV.
This launch is utterly brazen. There is not a single policeman around here.
Such small boats were overloaded with desperate migrants, often under the watchful eye of French police officers who just let it happen.
Hello? You okay?
The number of asylum applications in the UK has risen substantially since 2010. And in the last years, this coincided with an increasing number of small boat arrivals. At its peak in 2022, 35 boats successfully crossed the English Channel every single day.
Very, very dangerous crossings.
Some of this was broadcasted on live television.
Yeah, you can see why it's dangerous today.
This type of coverage from broadcasters like Sky News and the BBC have received much criticism for dehumanizing people who are risking their life. One MP called it grotesque reality TV. If we look back in time, we can see that the number of asylum applications is not unprecedented in scale. But the now preferred method of crossing the channel in a small boat made the issue more visible.
We've introduced tough new measures today to help us stop the boats.
Rishi Sunak made this a top priority, but his party has historically failed to make good on this promise.
If we take the steps set out today, if we deal with all the different avenues of migration, legal and illegal, then levels of immigration can return to where they were, and I believe that that will mean net migration to this country will be in the order of tens of thousands each year, not the hundreds of thousands every year that we've seen over the last decade.
This kind of rhetoric might not sound bold today, but in 2010 it was new. It reframed migration control as a process of balancing the books.
So we put a cap on the numbers of non-EU immigrants allowed to come and work into our country.
When David Cameron became Prime Minister, net migration to the UK was at a record high of nearly 200,000, and he set the target to limit this to the tens of thousands by 2015. But the trend during his administration, in reality, looked like this. If we break this down into net migration from British, EU, and non-EU citizens, we can see that his policies hardly had any effect, and migration from EU countries went slightly up.
I think we should take the chance now, as a country, to take back control.
On the road to campaign for Brexit, it was all about taking back control. Britons voted to leave the EU, and one of the expectations was that they could finally put in place stricter migration policies to limit the number of migrants.
So we'll have a new Prime Minister in that building behind me by Wednesday evening.
I have just been to Buckingham Palace.
Theresa May became Prime Minister. As Home Secretary under David Cameron, she was one of the architects of the UK's migration policies, and she continued the same rhetoric.
We want to bring net migration to sustainable levels. We say those are in the tens of thousands.
Under her watch, migration did go down a bit, but if we break this down into migration from British, EU, and non-EU migrants, you can see that her policies were mostly successful at halting migrants from EU countries, while migration from non-EU countries more than doubled. We're now almost 10 years into Conservative rule, and the same promises of bringing migration levels down to the tens of thousands are still being repeated, and politicians have not even closely delivered on this promise. Then Boris Johnson broke with that tradition. He shifted the attention from overall migration to cracking down on irregular migration. But the results under his watch were quite shocking. Breaking this down into countries of origin, we can see that net migration from EU countries dropped below zero for the first time, while more British returned to the country, and migration from non-EU countries went through the roof. Like always, this is partly due to external factors: the first COVID lockdown, the end of the Brexit transition period, unrest in Hong Kong, the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and the invasion of Ukraine all happened during Johnson's term. This period also saw a significant increase of asylum applications, and the route over the English Channel in a small boat began to gain popularity right before his term started. It isn't entirely understood why this route became preferred, but it's plausible that this is because of increased police enforcement on the other routes. The nationalities of these refugees varied greatly per year, but 2/3 of all small boat refugees since 2018 were from Iran, Albania, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. This led to another concern. Between 2000 and 2020, this added 7 million new people to the UK population, and 90% of total population growth was driven by migrants. And these were mostly from non-European countries. Johnson's rhetoric changed, but he equally failed to deliver on his promises. Liz Truss came and went, and Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister.
From the beginning.
You said you'd going to stop the boat, so I just want to know
and
what
we will keep
is.
going until we do.
Okay.
He inherited his party's pledge from 2019 to bring the number of migrants down, but this was now completely out of reach.
So when will you have stopped the boat?
Okay. This is not one of these things where there's a precise date.
You don't have a date.
At the start of his term, he promised to bring them down from the 2022 level. Sunak continued Johnson's focus on irregular migration, and the small boats became his focal point.
And I have a clear plan to get it done.
From the data we currently have, the trends seem to have gone down. This started under the brief period under Liz Truss, and it continued under Sunak, but it's still too early to draw any conclusions. That concluded 14 years of Conservative government with persistent promises that weren't delivered, and initiatives to bring down the number of irregular migrants that simply didn't work.
Be relocated to Rwanda.
This likely has something to do with the fact that now 8 out of 10 people believe that the government is handling immigration poorly. But contrary to this, in 2022, the number of people who wanted to see immigration numbers to be reduced was just 42%. This number was historically 60, 70 or even 80%, and it has never been this low. It went up again last year to 51%, but still, if we bring up the chart of how immigration is a concern amongst British people, we see that in June 2023, this was just 21%, up from 8% a year earlier. But all this dissatisfaction about migration policies, a growing concern about the compatibility of values from migrant communities, the constant lying and deceiving from public figures, and perceived biases by the police and the media, it was all simmering under the surface when, in Southport, that tragedy occurred. A few hours after the attack at 4:49 p.m., that fake name was shared. It was picked up by a number of large accounts, including @EndWokeness, which has almost 3 million followers, and their posts have been shared by Elon Musk in the past. What is particularly troublesome is this account, which received almost 4 million impressions because it poses as a legitimate news site. In fact, little is known about this page. It became clear how much it influenced the spread of fake news, and journalists investigated this channel. The Daily Mail published that it started 11 years ago as a Russian YouTube channel, and they claim to be based in the United States. But their website is registered with an online hosting company in Lithuania. They rebranded themselves in the past as Fox 3 News, and later Fox 3 Now, before settling on Channel 3 Now. After the investigation of the Daily Mail, the YouTube channel was taken offline, before re-emerging a few days later with a slightly different name. To be absolutely clear, we don't yet know the full story, but we do know the effect that this tweet had. Take a look at this chart. This is when the attack took place, and this big circle is the post from Channel 3 Now. In the hours that followed, when there was little publicly known about what had happened, tweets sharing misinformation, as visualized by these red circles, gained millions of impressions more than tweets denouncing misinformation, visualized by these blue circles. This all seemed to have had an effect on what happened in the hours and the days after the Southport attack, and this is nothing new. In the days and weeks following this terrible attack, our news cycles bombarded us with images of the most extreme responses, and it deserves our attention. We should call out against this senseless rioting, and it inspired thousands of people to voice their compassion, but it only further divided an already polarizing narrative around migration. Most people have compassion for refugees. Most people understand that vital sectors like agriculture and healthcare depend on migrant workers. But most people are also concerned about migration, but that is quickly labeled racist or far-right. One of the reasons why it could escalate as it did is because the government failed to get a grip on migration, which should be considered in the broader context of the demise of the welfare state. And another major component was the spread of disinformation, which helped fuel these riots. And this is something that's happening way too often. I made another video about a very similar thing that happened in Ireland. If you're interested in watching this next, you can click on the video here on the left.